It's my privilege and honor to welcome everyone to this afternoon's 16th Annual Neil Aggett Memorial Lecture. We put a special welcome out to all those guests who join us from our surrounding schools and from Makanda, to our council members, our heads of school, our staff and our pupils, and lastly to Mr. Jonathan Shapiro, or Zapiro as you like to go by. Today is a very special day. Firstly, we're able to meet here in person and to bring our Neil Aggett Memorial Lecture back into the chapel and not do this virtually. More notably, however, and last year we were in the chapel for this auspicious occasion but had a live stream from our speaker. I think between Ms. Prayson and some of our team, we thought that might be the case today with the BA disaster, and Zapiro nearly didn't make it here today. We were still trying to sort out flights when he was booked on a BA flight, so it really is very, very awesome to have got you here, so thank you. It's 40 years since Neil Aggett passed, and that is obviously an important number for us, and I'm sure lots of people are going to talk about this as well, but I think it's 10 days ago his death has now been ruled as a murder and not a suicide, and that is massive in what we are talking about in terms of social justice and going forward. So today really is a special day, and we are honored to have all of you here and to have you join us this afternoon. So sit back, enjoy what is going to be promising to be an awesome afternoon. Thank you. I will now call up Mr. Neil Hartzenberg to talk to us a little bit more about this. Neil is an ex-Kingswood teacher who was really instrumental in getting the memorial lecture going and continues to be instrumental in driving this very special day. So Neil, if I can call you up, please. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. As has been already alluded to, every year we host this memorial lecture in honor of Dr. Neil Aggett, a former Kingswood College pupil who lost his life during the anti-apartheid struggle for liberation. And this lecture is a tribute to all those who have lost their lives in the fight for human rights and social justice. Now, my role, as I see it anyway, is just to share a little bit about who Neil Aggett was, just to put a little bit of context in place for some of you who maybe don't know. Neil Aggett matriculated here at Kingswood College in December 1970 with a first-class pass. He had spent 7 years here as a boarder in the senior school. He must have started in the junior school, but he was here for 7 years. I was here as a grade 9 pupil at Kingswood College in the year that he was in matric. So that might give you a little bit of context. I knew him, I didn't know him well, but as I've said before, I'm very proud of the fact that I share the same first name as him, and also a very special Kingswood heritage I'm able to share with him. By all accounts, and from what I can recall, Neil was a solid, all-round Kingswood pupil. He was a very well-respected resident of Gainhouse when he was in the senior school, and in his last year at Kingswood, he was the head prefect of Jake's House, which at that time was the junior school boys' boarding house. And there was a tradition in those days that matric pupils were prefects in the junior boys' hostel. So he had a very caring nature and was considered to be suitable for caring and leading young children. During his time at Kingswood and later, whilst he was training to become a medical doctor at UCT, he became more and more aware and horrified by the serious deprivation of basic human rights across South African society. It's clear that these realizations seriously influenced the choices he made in his life after this realization. In 1977, he started as an intern doctor at Mthatha General Hospital and later worked at Tembisa and then at Baragwanath Hospital in Gauteng. And during these times, he became more and more frustrated with the hardships that were endured by black South Africans under the apartheid regime. And in response to this frustration, he decided to roll up his sleeves and get involved in making a difference for the better. So in order to do this, he sidelined his promising medical career, and I'm told he was a very, very wise and astute doctor. And he became actively involved in the growing, but still at that time, illegal and unregistered black trade union movement. At that point in time, it was illegal for black people to belong to trade unions. Only whites could belong to trade unions. He worked on weekends at the hospital as a casualty doctor, and then that was to earn income. And then during the week, he was an unpaid volunteer helping factory workers to get organized in trade unions. And this was in order for them to be able to fight for the basic working conditions that we all expect to be the norm. Legendary trade union leader Oscar Mpeta at Neil's funeral described Neil as a man of the people. So he was clearly very widely respected in a lot of different fields. He was detained for interrogation by the South African Security Police towards the end of 1981, and on the 5th of February 1982, at the age of 28, he was found hanging in his cell at the then John Vorster Square police station in Johannesburg. No charge was ever laid against him. In other words, no one can ever prove that he broke any rules. A biased, apartheid-influenced judicial inquest found no one responsible for his death. They argued that he had committed suicide after he had implicated fellow activists during questioning. As Mr. Wright said earlier, a couple of weeks ago, 40 years after the first inquest, a reconvened, far more impartial judicial inquest has now determined that he was in fact murdered by his interrogators who used inhumane torture techniques over a protracted period of questioning. So, this memorial lecture, the memorial window behind me, some of you might not be able to see it, and the awarding of this Neil Aggett trophy, they all together serve to commemorate and at the same time to encourage us Kingswoodians and others, not only to value the selfless contribution made by this special old Kingswoodian, but also to encourage the growth of a strong sense of social justice in everyone, in our staff, in our pupils, and in our community. In this way, helping us all to become stronger social justice activists wherever we are involved, at all times, and following Neil Aggett's example. A little bit more, the stained glass window behind me was installed soon after Neil's death in 1982, as a result of requests and donations, mostly from Neil's school friends. This annual lecture format, which was initiated in 2006 at the suggestion of a Kingswood history pupil who had done his matric project on Neil Aggett's life, and together with him, his history teacher, Old Kingswoodian Robert Charlton, they initiated this lecture, as I indicated. Previously, ad hoc memorial lectures and events had been held to honor Neil's memory and contribution. Then in 1910, at the 40-year reunion of Neil Aggett's 1970 matric class, under the leadership of the late Brian Sandberg, the class of 1970 decided to donate a very special sculpture to be used as a trophy and requested it to be named the Neil Aggett Award. This statue was crafted by an exceptional Eastern Cape African sculptress is relevant because Neil Aggett was a creative soul, and our city is also home to the National Arts Festival. This statue or trophy, in their minds, represents someone of no specific race, proud and tall, broad-shouldered and strong-legged, and firmly committed to social service in the face of the struggle to fight human suffering and social injustices that exist within South Africa and wider society. So the purpose of the award was to foster a spirit of individual service above self in young men and women of Kingswood College. It should pay tribute to the recipient's true commitment to a wider social responsibility within the college, as well as towards the local and national community. The class of 1970 believes that Neil Aggett's life should be considered a true vocation that centered around a tireless calling to community service for the betterment of society at large. For him, there was clearly no desire for any material accumulation in his life, but rather his focus lay with the betterment of those lives he could personally serve. For me, the following specific lessons on community outreach are reinforced by what I like to call the Neil Aggett way. And these 3 points are: make sure you clearly understand the community problems around you. Secondly, commit yourself to doing something meaningful and constructive with those affected. And thirdly, do it even if it means sacrificing a more comfortable lifestyle for yourself. In closing, please remember that Dr. Neil Aggett paid the ultimate price, serving the Johannesburg factory workers community as an elected, unpaid, and fully accountable trade union official. He gently guided and trained others by his example as he quietly went about this invaluable community work. Thank you for being here to learn and to pay tribute today. Together, we must let the memory of Neil Aggett live on through our actions. Long live the Neil Aggett way.
Distinguished guests, friends of Kingswood and Kingswoodians, I welcome you all to Kingswood. I've titled my speech, Courage, Truth and Hope. And after Dave and Neil have spoken about Dr. Neil Aggett and the recent inquest. I think I'll move along from that and just let you ponder on two aspects. The first is, what kind of courage and hope must a man have to sacrifice everything that he has, to come from an area of privilege, to sacrifice for his common man in South Africa? And the second is like the first, and that is to the Aggett family, who for 40 years have fought for truth. And last week was a 40-year journey. It wasn't simply one decision by an inquest. It had been a 40-year fight. Another great man who passed recently was Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and I'd like to tell you a story that was written about his courage and his hope for our country. So during the deepest and darkest days of apartheid, when the government tried to shut down opposition by cancelling political rallies, Archbishop Desmond Tutu decided that he would hold a church service instead. St. George's Cathedral in Cape Town, South Africa, was filled with worshippers. Outside the cathedral, hundreds of police gathered, a show of force intended to intimidate. As Tutu was preaching, they entered the cathedral armed and lined the walls. They took out notes and recorded Tutu's words. But Tutu would not be intimidated. He preached against the evils of apartheid, declaring it could not endure. At one extraordinary point, he addressed the police directly. "You are powerful. You are very powerful, but you are not gods, and I serve a God who cannot be mocked. So since you've already lost, I invite you today to come and join the winning side." With that, the congregation erupted into dance and song. The police did not know what to do. Their attempts at intimidation had failed, overcome by the Archbishop's confidence that truth and goodness would triumph over evil. Both Tutu and Neil Aggett are powerful symbols of courage, hope, and the pursuit of truth. A 40-year struggle in Aggett's case that culminated in the truth finally being told. Another excellent fellow was St. Thomas Aquinas, who was a Dominican monk who lived in the 13th century and gave valuable insights into the virtues of hope and courage. And his words are still relevant today. Now, Kingswoodians, stay with me because I'm going into philosophy. Aquinas insisted that reason and revelation were separate but complementary forms of knowledge. He argued that since both ultimately come from God, they cannot be in conflict. Or in other words, that religion and science are one and the same. Accordingly, Aquinas is also one of the first thinkers to reconcile the work of ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle with Christianity. Aristotle argued that ethics are principally concerned with becoming the best version of ourselves. For Aristotle, a truly ethical person is also a truly excellent person. Aquinas accepted this understanding, but he also argued that Aristotle's interpretation of ethics was incomplete and imperfect. Aquinas said that ethics must also incorporate the theological virtues of faith, hope, and love. These virtues, Aquinas argued, come to us not from reason, but from grace. They are gifts from God that serve to direct people towards their salvation. According to the theologian, they make it possible for human beings to achieve a dimension of both happiness and excellence that they cannot achieve otherwise. Aristotle defined virtue as a mean between two vices. Kingswoodians, that's the middle ground. So the mean between two vices. Often we think of good and bad as polar opposites. This is not what Aristotle was saying. So for example, let's look at courage. Courage is found between recklessness, which is an excess of courage on the one hand, and cowardice, which is its deficiency on the other. Deciding how to be courageous is never simple and depends dramatically on circumstances. But courage will always be found between these two extremes. Aquinas follows this concept of virtue, and he argues that the theological virtue of hope fits the pattern. According to him, it lies between two vices. Presumption is the excess of hope, while despair is its deficiency. Presumption is easy. Confidence is an easy confidence that everything is going to be fine. The presumptive person thinks that no matter how much he sins or she sins, God would not punish or exclude them from glory. Despair is the opposite. It means the sinner believes that she has fallen so far from God that there is no possibility of salvation. Salvation might seem like an extreme concept. However, having lived in Makanda for a while, many might believe that our only saving grace is salvation. Nevertheless, there are examples of many South Africans responding to our current malaise with the same vices of presumption and despair. In the current climate, presumption appears as a vague optimism that we have democracy and we've survived many crises, and that this is just another one. Many of us believe that the current crisis is a problem for those in power to address. They see no reason to change their own behavior. Despair is even more evident. Most South Africans have expressed at least temporary feelings of despair around COVID, climate change, and also the current state of our economy. And no doubt, having all of these crises coincide at once only adds to the sense that they are beyond our ability to solve. But for Aquinas, hope is not an either-or. Hope is the mean between these two vices. And it is also the most realistic response to our condition. By Aquinas' definition, hope is grounded in some desired future that is both possible to achieve, but also very difficult. Hope is therefore more realistic than either vice. Presumption denies the difficulty of the goal, but also the responsibility of the individual in making it happen. Whilst despair denies the fact that the goal, despite its arduousness, is yet possible. Hope is the mean because it requires people to be both clear and conscientious about what they are up against and what they are striving to achieve. In this understanding, hope is much more than mere optimism. Hope is an act of will. One chooses to be hopeful. Hope insists that though the task is difficult, even daunting, change remains possible. It therefore sustains all who take up this work that must be done. If this act of will seems beyond your ability right now, consider this. Aquinas said that we hope chiefly in our friends. It is easier to be hopeful when others love us, support us, and share our hopes. This is why he says we need a community of fellow believers for hope to exist. Understood the way Aquinas suggests, hope emerges as a distinctive democratic virtue, one that courageous men and women such as Aggett and Tutu consciously chose to follow. Without willful, realistic hope, and without a coalition of hopeful people working together, apartheid would never have fallen. The Berlin Wall would still stand tall. And racism, gender-based violence, economic inequality, and war will remain insurmountable obstacles. With hope, we will be the change that we want to see in the world. I now move on to the presentation of the Neil Aggett Award. And it gives me great pleasure to call on this year's recipient, Kaylee Smith. Kaylee Smith is being awarded this honor of the Neil Aggett Award in recognition of her dedication to serving those around her, especially those who are less fortunate. When COVID-19 struck and schooling went online with no possibility of extramural activities, Kaylee used her spare time at home to start a project called Alex's Angels. Being creative by nature, she started making jewelry from the materials she had available, moving from sales to friends and family to advertising via social media and sending her products around the country. As a 15-year-old child, Kaylee saw the need to help where injustice exists. Her project started small but has grown and will continue to have an impact on those in the community who need support. Having realized that there were others in much greater need of funds and support than herself, she used the money she generated from these sales to purchase essential items such as food, groceries, and nappies for young mothers and babies in her surrounding community. This project is still running today, and Kaylee hopes to see it grow to the point where she can employ local people to help meet the demand. Kaylee's keen sense of right and wrong has enabled her to make a stand against injustice. She goes beyond the call of duty to serve others. Her empathetic nature is evident in all that she does. She is able to organize events and gets others involved in assisting and making a difference. As an active member of the Senior Christian Society Committee, Kaylee is always friendly and welcoming to those attending SCA events, and she organized an excellent Grade 7 event as part of her role within Interact. Her Interact responsibilities have also seen her take on the role of being the coordinator of the group that engages with the children from the Aftercare and Enrichment Project at the Lebone Center, the NGO associated with Kingswood College. This entails liaising with the Lebone Center staff, designing relevant activities for the children, and marshalling a team of fellow Kingswoodians to visit the center on Wednesday afternoons to implement the activities. Though small in stature, there is nothing small about Kaylee's wish to speak up for those around her who need a voice, or to point out injustice. She is determined to be there for her fellow boarding hostel dwellers, especially those younger and more vulnerable than herself. The fact that so many of her peers nominated Kaylee to this award is a true testament to her character. When questioned regarding what she feels strongly about, Kaylee points out that there are many in South Africa who, through no fault of their own, are struggling to make ends meet, to feed themselves, or to find a job. Her heart and her Christian convictions have led her into actions that might alleviate the poverty she sees around her. The Neil Aggett Award will hopefully serve as the first step to a life that understands and makes a deep impact on the social injustices in our country, no matter what the cost. Kaylee, congratulations. Could I call the heads up to come and congratulate Kaylee? I would now like to call on Council Member Richard Gaber to come and do the introduction for Jonathan.
Dr. Jonathan Shapiro, better known as Zapiro, is the 16th speaker at the Neil Aggett Memorial Lecture. Dr. Shapiro is an activist, a satirist, a puppeteer, a cartoonist, or a visual columnist. In recognition of his work, he has won many honors and been bestowed many awards, including 2 honorary doctorates and a French knighthood. Over the last 40 years, he has shown us the light. He has exposed the darkness. He's made us laugh. He's made us cry. He's enraged some of us, provided meaning, championed free speech, challenged power, but perhaps most importantly made us think. The 9th Neil Aggett Lecture speaker, Justice Albie Sachs, said, "Humor is one of the great solvents of democracy. It permits the ambiguities and contradictions of public life to be articulated in non-violent forms. It enables a multitude of discontents to be expressed in a myriad of spontaneous ways. It is an elixir of constitutional health." Dr. Shapiro, welcome to Kingswood. We look forward to hearing you speak.
Thank you. First, I'd like to say that is actually the first time I've been introduced as Dr. Shapiro. I couldn't help. I'm honored to have an honorary doctorate from Rhodes University, but I think I may have to change my studio to consulting rooms. I wanted to, right at the outset, say congratulations to Kaylee. What an inspiration you are at your age, already doing exactly what this award and what the Neil Aggett Lecture talk is all about. Really, really impressive and caring and fighting for social justice and all of the things that are what this great award and talk are all about. Yeah, in fact, this is the first time I've come to this city since it was renamed, and so I called the talk Makanda Forever, and I'm sure you'll get the reference. And there are one or two things in the talk, in this talk that I will give you that refer to Makanda Wakanda. So, yes, careful, this pen is loaded. That's kind of one of my little things that I use as a cartoonist. In my private life, I'm not quite as outrageous as I am as a cartoonist. We have kind of license to be. But it all started for me in pretty much the way it starts for a lot of cartoonists. I'm sure you have some of your friends, some of you here are interested in doing caricatures of your teachers. Often the teachers were not that keen to see the caricatures. Sometimes they were. I went to school at Rondebosch Boys in primary and high school in Cape Town, and I always wanted to be a cartoonist, but I didn't really know how. I didn't study art at school. I also had some sort of budding, sort of developing concern about social justice, but it took a lot to actually get me. I certainly wasn't as young as Kaylee by the time I was doing anything that I considered worthwhile. So it took a while, and sometimes it takes a long time before you find out exactly what you are going to do. Here's a picture of me where by the time I had started to move into becoming an activist, and it took a lot. In my case, it was being conscripted into the army and not finding a way to get out of it. I went to the army, and all I did at that stage, being unconnected to political organizations. Later, I would have been prepared to be a full conscientious objector, but at that stage, what I was prepared to do was to refuse to carry a gun. And that started me on the road. I had studied architecture. I didn't want to be an architect. When I was in my 4th year of architecture, they encouraged us to travel. I decided my main concern was to go and meet cartoonists who I admired. And I can't really dwell on some of the stories that take too long, but the one thing I did do as a rash, I don't know, I was listening to Mr. Crevier speaking about those continuums between different facets of courage or recklessness or whatever, but as a rash and fairly reckless 21-year-old, I went to try and find Udazo, who did Asterix. He died at the beginning of COVID at the age of 92. But I went to Paris unannounced because I was looking for him. French people in Paris wouldn't really help me find him, and they didn't really want to speak English. And I eventually found his address, and I got lost on the outskirts of Paris. And at 11 o'clock at night, not in summer either, so it was dark and nobody was out and about, I rang his doorbell at 11 o'clock at night, and he invited me in. A scruffy student with a backpack trying to explain in English, and he couldn't understand English, and I couldn't understand French. He actually invited me in, and that made a huge impact on me. And it was one of those parts of the decision. I said, okay, I'm going to do this. And luckily his daughter arrived and translated for us. She was studying English. But that was, that's just before this pick. By the time this pick happened, I'd been in the army, refusing to carry a gun, getting into trouble, being investigated by military intelligence, being arrested for the first time. That means that there were other times. So the first time I got arrested, I was actually in the army, and it was enormously embarrassing to the army, who had just sent me against my will on a top secret mission. I kid you not. I was to go and draw Tintin style. Hergé was my other hero at that stage, and they knew I could draw, and I had asked them They knew my political affiliations. I had already joined the United Democratic Front. I'd been in the army for about a year, and they sent me on this top secret mission, which I hated being on, where I was sort of around the heads of the various military, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and the medical services, and I had to draw the capabilities, which was absolutely shocking to me. 2 weeks after I arrived back, I got arrested for the first time in a UDF, United Democratic Front motorcade. We were the first people ever to be charged with illegal gathering in cars. Many people had been charged with illegal gathering. We were the first ones. We were in a motorcade, and they decided that that was an illegal gathering, so we were in fact charged with that, and I was actually convicted of that as well. And this went all through my army time, so I was going in this brown uniform every day, taking as much as I could from military supplies to my UDF comrades, where we would make posters and get chased in the night by police. That actually happened, as we were putting up these posters. One of the posters that I designed around that time was Botha's Emergency Legalized Murder. I took a piece of the text of the state of emergency, and then I had blood dripping down saying legalized murder with a picture of Police Casper underneath, things like that. And we were chased, and we put that up, and we were spotted by police, and we managed to get away in the back roads. I wasn't so lucky on other occasions. That also is at the time when I was speaking. That picture was taken when I went to a workshop to speak to young people roughly your age, so I was not that many years older, but I would do workshops to try and get people to express themselves in cartoons and in graphics, and to become activists and to fight against the injustices, the very same injustices that Neil Aggett fought against and died for. I first heard of Neil Aggett just before that. I've heard when he was in detention. I was at that stage starting to study graphic design. I was only there for a few months before the army removed me from university, and that's when all of this began for me. And it was deeply shocking when I heard that Neil Aggett had actually been murdered. We knew, as has been alluded to a couple of times already, Neil Aggett did not die by his own hand. He was murdered by security police, as happened to almost everyone who died in detention. I actually experienced a little bit of detention. Now I'm going to, so this is sort of by way of intro to where I was suddenly in the mid-80s. I was now an activist, doing cartoons, trying to use my cartoons as my form of activism. And there's one more cartoon where I'll speak a little bit more about it, and then I'll show you some things and take you on a whistle-stop tour through some things where, especially where young people have had some sort of intervention. And there have been some very, very important young people in our country. So I decided in 1986, and by the way, I was, by that stage, 28 years old, the age that Dr. Aggett was when he was killed by the security police. So I decided to try and do one drawing that would express a lot more of the fun and joy of actually being involved in the struggle, because the struggle had huge darkness, and I wasn't experiencing the kind of deprivation and the kind of savagery and the kind of daily grind that many people who I came across were. And again, the kinds of things that inspired both Neil Aggett and Kaylee. So, but I decided to also show just what, there was so much, again, something Dr. Crevier mentioned, hope. There was hope, and there was commitment, and there was enthusiasm, and we felt we had justice on our side, and we felt, so I decided to do that in a poster, and that's a poster very much of Cape Town, sort of Cape Flats, And I could speak about this cartoon for half an hour. There's so many things to say about it, but I will say that it's the first thing that got me noticed, both by the people who I was drawing for, who were the comrades and people involved in organizations, and the people who I was drawing against. The police are, I don't know if there is, well, I won't use a laser thing, it would be too difficult both ways, but the police are drawn as pigs, which was an old American struggle tradition, well, not that old, it started in the 70s, and at that stage, 1986, going into 87, and the police, both the actual police and the undercover police are drawn as pigs. And so the police were not happy about this drawing. There's also allusions to the ANC. The ANC, of course, was banned. You couldn't do the colors, which I did. You couldn't say MK is coming and Mkhonto we Sizwe, the armed wing of the ANC. You couldn't say something like Botha is killing our people. All of those things are on there. Oliver Tambo's name is on there. Nelson Mandela's name is on there. So this was in fact banned by, in those days they could ban something and you were not allowed to distribute it. This was banned 6 weeks after I drew it. And the police came around looking for me, and they came looking for this. It was a calendar. It had a struggle calendar underneath it, and we had to hide them. We distributed them, but there are many things that happened there. I'm actually in the middle of that drawing. You see me walking in there, right in the middle, with my then girlfriend who became my wife. I've got my drawing pad with me. My mother is in there. She became an activist at the age of, so you can become young or old. She was 53 when she became an activist at the same time as we did. She'd been a frustrated activist for many years and really wanted to do something. And we found a home in UDF where people were working, people in trade unions, people in women's groups, students, all kinds of activists, street committees. It was, and I often feel it would be great if we had something like that again. And it's very difficult to see exactly where that happens. So I'll tell you one or two more things about this one, and then it'll go. Then there'll be less to say about some of the others, but I want to take you in a sort of a segue through them. So eventually, a year and a half after I drew this drawing, I was in fact detained by the security police. When I was least expecting it, I was preparing to go and study in America. I'd been given a scholarship to study in New York based on my cartoons and the sort of activism that I had been involved in. And I wasn't expecting it, which of course the security police never come when you are expecting them. And at about 3:30 in the morning, they arrived, dragged me off to Polesmoor prison, and I went into my first interrogation. I just want to say as well, I did not experience torture, experience the kinds of things that many people experienced in detention. But it was bad. You didn't know when you were going to get out. I was put in solitary confinement for not answering questions. Actually, the first questions the security police asked me were, they said, "Why do you draw us as pigs?" And I said, "I draw what I see," which wasn't the right answer. Now, that's in fact when they put me in solitary. I was in for 11 days. They thought I was in the Nelson Mandela Birthday Committee. I wasn't on that committee. But there was another guy in my little branch of the UDF. His name was Jonathan Shapiro as well. We just happened to, the two of us, Jonathan Shapiros. He was known as Jojo. He's a crazy guy. He's the one on the roof lassoing the helicopter, or trying to lasso the helicopter. He had once tried to break a police van's windscreen with his fist and succeeded in breaking his fist. He wanted to get the video camera out. And so he was a very crazy guy, but an amazing guy. He was on the Nelson Mandela Birthday Committee. I knew that, or I thought that, but I didn't say anything. So then they let me out 11 days later, after Mandela's birthday. Remember, in 1988, they were celebrating Mandela's 70th birthday all over the world, especially at Wembley Stadium in London. And we were celebrating here. Of course, you weren't allowed to. And so they let us out after Madiba's birthday. I managed to get across to America. I studied for 2 years. So 2.5 years after this, I arrived. I'm back in Cape Town. I see Jojo at a party, and I said to him, I said, "Hey, Jojo, you know that they detained me because they thought I was you. He said, no, shit, while you were away, they detained me because they thought I was you. So I said, okay, we're quits. Okay, so now I'm going to go a lot quicker through the other drawings, but they're there for very particular reasons. Jump to 27th of April 1994. Madiba has been out of prison now for 4 years. He becomes the new president. That is the image that I produced on the day that we became a democracy. I was chatting with some of the students earlier. That's one of the images without any words. Not many of them are, but that one, I felt Madiba embodied the spirit of the new democracy, the hope that was mentioned earlier, optimism, and it was indeed, it was an incredible time, and the institutions were being developed, proper parliament, proper constitution, and to have someone like Nelson Mandela there inspiring us was phenomenal. South Africa needed to change. Madiba was a reconciler in the way that very few of us could have been with the kinds of things that he experienced. He actually went to see Betsy Verwoerd, the widow of the architect of apartheid, Hendrik Verwoerd. He went to see her in her white enclave, Orania, and I imagined the two of them in there, and he said, pardon me, Mrs. Verwoerd, but do you often get earthquakes here? Oh, that's just Hendrik rolling in his grave. He does that a lot these days. And that was really, it really felt like things were changing in ways that we couldn't imagine. Of course, there were still things that were not changing, but it was an amazing time. Now, the first great fight that activists really had to fight against and go up against the new authorities in South Africa. Sometimes activists who'd been anti-apartheid activists and were now finding themselves fighting against the new order, who were supposed to be doing what was needed. Even through Nelson Mandela's time, I'm afraid, he figured things out near the end of his presidency around HIV and AIDS and really did a lot after that. But during his time, not so much. And Thabo Mbeki became an AIDS denialist. And there were, of course, people like Zaki Ahmad and the Treatment Action Campaign, relatively young activists who were veterans of the struggle, but were fighting for that cause. But there was also one young boy named Nkosi Johnson, who was HIV positive, and whose adoptive mother was also, he and his adoptive mother were trying to get Thabo Mbeki and Manto Shabalala and Simang, the health minister, to actually stop being AIDS denialists and to admit that HIV caused AIDS. They actually questioned that, and to stop giving vegetable remedies instead of antiretrovirals. And he was courageous, and he went on the stage at the World AIDS Conference, and I did this cartoon about him, which is sad, but I hope powerful. There he is sitting on Becky's knee. One day, you too could become a leader in the fight against AIDS. It's an inversion, which we do in cartoons, where you're expecting the wisdom to come from the older person and be imparted to the younger person. And there it was the other way around. Thabo Mbeki never even visited him. He became a big international figure, never visited him, and he died at the age of 12. And he's somebody who also had tremendous courage and tremendous charisma, and somebody that I remember very, very well as somebody who, incredibly young, really fought hard against injustice and for real social responsibility. Thabo Mbeki did say something that inspired this next cartoon, and it's something that is uncomfortable. And Mbeki talked about two nations, and there were some white people who felt that was divisive, not as reconciling as Nelson Mandela. But I felt Mbeki had a good point, because there were many people who hadn't really, many white people who said that I didn't know what was going on. I was too young. never voted for the National Party. That was interesting because a lot of people said that, but the National Party amongst the white people got a big majority every election. So that was, you didn't always know if people were telling the truth about that. There were many reasons. So I did this cartoon, when that debate was happening. Whites who never benefited from apartheid, which was the most powerful cartoon I've ever done on that subject. And there's nothing in there. That's the point. Cartoons are about communication. They're not always about drawing. I had many, many ideas to try and represent this notion. And then I suddenly realized no white person, whether you are an ordinary person in the street or even Joe Slovo compared to his black comrades, no white person did not benefit and does not still benefit from apartheid. So that was I felt was more eloquent than anything else I could say. And it was quite a controversial cartoon. I also remember trying to send it. There were no digital things. I had to fax this cartoon. So I had to get this clean white piece of, through by fax, which was quite funny. So it needed to stay clean and empty. Thabo Mbeki, at that stage, was also seen as very aloof. He was seen as not really a people person. We were seeing the real beginnings of corruption. Jackie Selebi was the police commissioner. Thabo Mbeki was protecting him. Jacob Zuma was trying to oust Thabo Mbeki. Jacob Zuma was much more of a sort of a people person. So with all that in mind, I did this cartoon, The Lion King, co-starring reward-winning Jackie Selebi, the police commissioner, and soon featuring Jacob Simba in I Just Can't Wait to Be King. So that was 2007. Jacob Zuma was waiting in the wings, and I knew, and a lot of people knew, that Jacob Zuma was corrupt. Jacob Zuma, we knew, had been corrupt since 1999, at least, the beginning of the arms deal. And so many of us were fighting very hard in whatever way we could to try and stop Jacob Zuma becoming president. Of course, we didn't have power, but it's important for people in civil society and in media and in every aspect of society to join in whatever struggle they can. And that's where I'm hoping, you'll find your way somewhere. Where your passion lies. So I did a cartoon in the run-up to a court case where it was going to be decided whether or not the corruption charges would stand. The very corruption charges that still stand against him now, by the way. There was a court case, and in that week, I decided to do a very, very tough cartoon. And that is this one. Go for it, boss. And it's a shocking cartoon still all these years later. That was done in 2008. He became president, by the way, in 2009. It does look like what it was meant to be. It's meant to be a gang rape scene, a gang rape about to happen. And the gang rape, these people are holding this woman down. But the woman is a symbol. It's not to be taken literally. The woman, it says on the justice system, Lady Justice is a symbol we inherited from the Greeks and then the Romans. She was always blonde. I had been doing Lady Justice as someone who at least looked more like a black woman in South Africa for about a decade, more than a decade by the time I did this drawing. And this drawing became enormously controversial. It was the most controversial drawing I've ever done. I haven't mentioned the fact that Jacob Zuma had already sued me for 15 million rand for some other drawings, but I haven't had time to show you all of that or talk about all of that. He sued me again for 7 million rand for this one. So I've been sued by Jacob Zuma for a grand total of 22 million rand, which I think is some sort of record. But and in fact, the 15 million was apparently a world record for a cartoonist being sued. But it doesn't really make any difference because he never paid me. I never paid him anything, and eventually he had to drop both cases. This one, in particular, if this had gone to court, which it took this one was 4 years that he pushed that and tried to get this into court and dropped it one day before it was due to go to court because it was about to be another ANC national conference, and his lawyers were advising him that that we would be able to show that what this case was all about, what this drawing was about, was that every single person in this drawing, the real people, not the symbolic one of Lady Justice, everyone, Jacob Zuma and Julius Malema and Gwede Mantashe and Bladen Nzimande and Zwelinzima Vavi, who I happened to admire quite a lot and who I had a reasonable relationship with, but I had to put him in this drawing, all had threatened anarchy or some kind of mayhem if the charges were not dropped against Jacob Zuma. So we could defend that in court, absolutely. And that's why they had to drop the case one day before it was due to go to court. I came under massive attack from the ANC, which I'd always supported and I'd always been a supporter of, but you can't define what you do by who you've been a supporter of. You have to see what they're doing at the time. I came under huge attack for this, and it is now on a list compiled by a very respected American commentator of 15 cartoons that changed the world. Although it didn't change the world, but they're regarded as cartoons that have had a massive impact in the society in which they were drawn at the time. So I'm honored to be on that list. Now, I'm going to go to a much lighter drawing. You'll see there's a shower on Jacob Zuma's head. That came from his rape case, where he had, during cross-examination, said that he knew the woman he had sex with, he said consensual sex, was HIV positive. She said it was rape. I believe her. And then he said, they asked him what did he do after he had sex with her, knowing she was HIV positive. He said he had a shower. Why? To lessen his chance of infection. He had been president of the National AIDS Council when he was deputy president. So that was an incredible answer. That shower then became a fixture for, excuse the pun, for all time for me, and it's been quite something. It had almost a life of its own. So a much lighter cartoon. Jacob Zuma by now is president, and here is one which I did on Father's Day, just when they were starting to do those things on the back of cars. So there you see Jacob Zuma and his 4 wives, and his, at that stage, 20 children, and then the dog and the cat and the goldfish. And I thought that would segue into another cartoon about a car and Jacob Zuma, and it's a much darker one, again, because Jacob Zuma, like a lot of leaders, started to forget. Many leaders who come out of struggles in all sorts of parts of the world forget some aspects of where they come from and don't care, and that's what I felt Jacob Zuma was. And his Blue Light Brigade accosted a student who gave them the finger outside UCT near where I live, and they stopped, grabbed him, put him in the car, beat him up, hooded him, and threw him out. And that's when I did this cartoon, and that's Jacob Zuma's Blue Light Brigade. And what I was trying to make a bigger point about that Blue Light Brigade mentality of driving through South Africa with all the inequities and inequalities and all the deprivation that existed during apartheid, and that they were supposed to be there to fix and to help with. And instead, we're either forgetting and not delivering, or in many instances becoming corrupt. And Jacob Zuma, of course, then, that is the big story of state capture. One of the biggest parts of it was his friends, the Guptas, and there you see By the Beloved Country, based on it's a parody of the great Alan Paton book, Cry the Beloved Country. But you see the Guptas there, and Zuma by now is just a little lapdog getting the treats, and they're online, and it says Minister's Special Add to Cart. And this is when we found they were actually buying ministerial appointments. They could decide who was going to become. So that's corruption of a special kind. That's not just corruption. That is what we started to know as state capture. And that's why I did that cartoon in that way. Always when you have people doing this sort of thing, you also have the counter. You have people, like as I said with Nkosi Johnson, luckily we got somebody who was appointed to be public protector, appointed by none other than Jacob Zuma, who thought she would be a yes woman, and she wasn't, and that was Thuli Madonsela. So this is just one of the many drawings I did of Thuli Madonsela, public protector, and I always drew her in this sort of a suit of armor or something. Somebody posted online, "Go Gandalf the Grey," because it felt like the kind of Lord of the Rings fight. It really did start to feel like, again, a fight of good versus evil. And she represented good, and she had in her hand there that flame is the Nkandla report, because Thuli Madonsela exposed some things that had started to be exposed in the media, and then she actually got this report in that said that he was doing this, all these upgrades and building this private residence, not a public residence, private residence with our money, with taxpayers' money. But Thuli Madonsela, the other thing to mention in terms of state capture, before she left office, she managed to institute the state capture report. She did a report on state capture, and that is how we got the state capture inquiry under Justice Zondo, who, thank goodness, has been now appointed the Chief Justice. So, because I think he will be a great Chief Justice for the next 2 years. And so that, Thuli Madonsela has played a very important part. There were lots of protests against Jacob Zuma. I just thought I would show you, I mentioned the shower's taken on a life of its own. This was one of the protests outside the outside the union buildings. People would make their own showers. The shower became a strange, has become some sort of expression of sort of discontent and parody. And it was amazing for me to see. I've got many pictures like this that people sent me from all over the place. But there were still people in government and in political parties trying to do what they could. That's also important. You can't write them all off when people say all politicians are corrupt, and that isn't true. So this is, in the year that we were trying to get rid of Jacob Zuma, the book, the annual that I produced that year was this one, Hastala Gupta, baby. And there's Pravin Gordhan as the Zuminator bursts in. So, you know, you get the reference, and it bursts into the Saxonwold Shebeen. Saxonwold Shebeen, by this time, was this fictional thing. Brian Molefe had said that he'd said there was a Shebeen in Saxonwold, which was something that he tried to make up because he'd been at the Gupta's household. By now, Zuma is just almost a cipher of a president. He's just a waiter bringing the drinks to the Guptas. There's Brian Molefe bursting out crying in the left-hand corner, which he did when he lied in Parliament. He cried. So there's lots of allusions to that. And finally, we did get rid of Jacob Zuma through many, many efforts, not least of which is the media, because the media brought us #Gupta Leaks, and the media specifically that brought that was the Daily Maverick, which I'm lucky enough to work for now. And so in 2017, when Zuma finally had to step down because too much had been exposed and it was too much of an embarrassment, I did this drawing, the end of an era. It's not an original phrase. That phrase had been used 40 years before, but it had its own kind of humor, just to have the shower as the F, and everyone knew exactly popular cartoons, strangely enough. So another young person has a kind of contrast right here, and that as you get to the end of Jacob Zuma, and around about this time, somebody who I had met on the way up became Times Person of the Year, and that was Trevor Noah. And that was the front page of Time magazine, the cover, Next Generation Leaders, Time, and Time expired. The one part that I will have to explain is, some of you probably don't know that I'm sure the older people will know that Jacob Zuma's head is in the shape of a parking meter with the expired time. You probably don't, maybe you've seen pictures of that, but it does seem like a thing sort of an era, but it's, I suppose, appropriate for someone whose time had expired. So then we got Cyril Ramaphosa, and that was meant to be our new dawn. And this is the book I did then, Let the Sunshine In, and there was a new movie out, and the movie was Black Panther, which is why I said that there's a couple of references here to Wakanda, Makanda, and so he was Rama Panther. I did him as a sort of slightly ironic superhero because I'm not exactly sure that he fits the superhero thing, but he's trying his best to get rid of all that stuff and that corruption, and the shower is all stuck in there, and it's going to be tough, and it was tough. I think it was not very clever of Cyril Ramaphosa at his State of the Nation speech shortly after that. I think it was a year later, where he started talking about this sort of a great new modernistic city with elevated everything, and that seemed like a strange dream, which I then did a dream of Wakanda, and there's the Rama Panther character again, and down on the streets are the real, that's the real situation, and it seemed absurd to talk about this thing, and it still seems absurd that he was talking about that when really, again, things were needing to be fixed and money was being squirreled away and there was a lot of corruption. So this next cartoon is one that I did, which then became a book cover as well, but this is the cartoon, and which side is up? And that's the ANC, and which side of the ANC? And it started because of Ace Magashule, that's his nickname, and of course, so he's the ace with his hand in the till and stabbing the president in the heart. Which side of the ANC is up? I don't know. I still don't know. I really don't, and I don't know if anyone could answer that question. I'm afraid they're running out of time, and they really have to do things better, including Cyril Ramaphosa. State capture report started off kind of quite genteel, and then by the third year, I did this one. Now with subpoenas, tongue lashing, skewerings, the mark of Zondo. So based on the mark of Zorro, just felt it seemed like a nice thing. I've done quite a few, in fact, recent ones of Judge Zondo as the kind of Zorro. And so I'm loving season 3. Season 3 was where we started to see the Judge Zondo get tougher, and I really enjoyed seeing some of those people squirm. This is the time in which I joined the Daily Maverick. Sorry, I think there's a cartoon missing. Okay. Yeah, there's meant to be a cartoon in here which showed when I joined Daily Maverick. And it had been just at the time that Zuma was leaving. So the last few cartoons are all sorts of things to do with how you might see and fit yourself into this new strange society. It's still strange, still full of inequality. My folks say we don't know how bad it was in the apartheid era. Same here, how lucky we are and all that. Well, I've heard stuff. It was really horrible. No PlayStation, no CGI effects, no Facebook, no Instagram. Dude, I hear they didn't even have cell phones or the internet. They're right, it's too hard to imagine. Hey, how about a movie at the mall? So there is that. There is that aspect of it. There are things that have changed, and you face very different things. But there are some of the things that, of course, are still the same. And here's one. So what would you like to be? Employed. And there's science and arts and tech and business and farming and teaching and engineering and all of that. But the girl on the iPad, it says 29% jobless, the world's second worst. And that's the official figures. Now the figures now are even higher. Youth unemployment is enormous, and it's really, really tough. So these are the kinds of things. And I was chatting to some of the students here who were saying that some of these cartoons crop up in in history or in English or in life orientation or whatever. And it's really nice that people are discussing the things that come out of the cartoons, but they're very real issues, and they're issues that you face. And of course, huge issue that you face and that we all face, and that I haven't even alluded to yet because I've been trying to take you through things until the last short period, is COVID. And right at the beginning of COVID, I did this cartoon. You may know Sisyphus, the character who had to, in Greek mythology, had to roll a rock, a heavy rock up a slope and never get to the top. Well, there's Cyril Ramaphosa and that COVID virus that he's rolling up there. There's something even more difficult. He'll never get to the top, but there's those other things coming down. Poverty, apartheid geography, how things are spaced out in this country of ours still. Inequality, apartheid-style lockdown. It was very different being in a township from being in a city, for how you experienced lockdown. Unemployment, hunger. So these are the kinds of things that we all still face, but that you are going to be facing, and hopefully you'll find some way to engage, and engage in a way that's meaningful to you, because that's what this is all about. And one more on this, I thought I'd throw this in because this was right at the beginning of COVID, and I said, going viral, the macarona. I started thinking of the coronavirus, and I started thinking about this little tune. So keep your social distance around about a meter. Don't shake hands, use the elbow or the feeder. Avoid big crowds, you should rather be a loner. I macarona. Sneeze into your elbow, it's essential hygiene. If you're symptomatic, maybe self-quarantine. It's all gone global from Beijing to Barcelona. I macarona. Clean hands often with hand sanitizer. Listen to official medical advisor. Ignore fake news when it pings on your phone. I macarona. Conspiracies, forget them, and religious polemic. It's not God's fury, it's a viral pandemic. Don't trust Trump, he's a bleep bleep morona. I macarona. And living in the daily life in South Africa, we have other issues that are going to we're going to need some solutions, because Eskom ain't providing them. This is when they had the technical task team. Don't panic, they've called in Eskom's technical task team. I thought, yeah, who they're going to put there? See, E.T. at the front, he's got his own little light that that shines. The minion is trying to light a lamp with a big lighter. There's Homer Simpson, Mr. Bean, Three Blind Mice, and Dr. Seuss, or the Cat in the Hat. And yeah, don't have huge faith. Nothing much has happened since the technical task team. Other things, the environment. I already had one cartoon about Trump. I could have shown you 20 cartoons, 30 cartoons about Trump. But the kind of person that Trump is, the right-wing populist, has taken hold in so many countries. And that is terrible for things like political freedom, but also for the environment. He makes common cause with people like Bolsonaro in Brazil. When Bolsonaro started trying to have vast swathes of the Amazon burnt, I did this cartoon, and there's based on the famous painting by Munch of the Scream, and there Trump, of course, just taking a selfie with Bolsonaro, and that's a massive thing that environmental issues and climate change are going to be huge things that affect every other aspect of our lives, and affect all those inequalities, and affect how we live in South Africa and in the world. Another young person who's made a huge impact, not in South Africa, but right across the world, Greta Thunberg, when she gave her famous speech, the How Dare You speech at the United Nations, I had her sort of almost a David Goliath type image with rocking the global establishment. And of course, something else that is very inspirational and often involves fairly young people is sport. So I thought, again, this one is an appropriate one. When Siya Kolisi was made captain of the Springboks, the first black captain of the Springboks, I did this one. They should be landing any moment now. They are superheroes who kind of fly in. They don't need SAA, luckily, or in my case, BA today. But yeah, So that was an enormously inspirational moment, as the 1995 was, but I think this one even more so. It really felt like there was something very powerful in that team and in Siya Kolisi. Of course, we need a hell of a lot more than that. So the last couple of cartoons are, again, about two of our greatest icons, both of whom have been mentioned today. The one, I was lucky enough to meet both of them a few times and have some amazing interactions with them. Archbishop Tutu was a phenomenal inspiration, and as was mentioned, he recently died. But just one of the many cartoons I did of the Arch, who was never afraid to speak truth to power. He would speak up on any issue. And when he in many instances said something like this: the rich must help the poor. Stop picking on us. And that's the old elite and the new elite. They were both exasperated with him. They didn't like it. They haven't liked the fact that he talked about a wealth tax, and he talked about that. But that idea that the rich must help the poor is so important. And so I call that truth, and reconciliation is used ironically here as a reconciliation between the old order and the new order, the old elite and the new elite. So it's, cartoonist license to say that, but I'm sure the Arch, he understood humor in an amazing way. He had such a great sense of humor that, he had an AIDS foundation. Now, this is the puppet we made of him for ZANews. I don't know how many of you have seen ZANews. There are still things that you can see online. But that was my favorite of all the puppets, was the one of the Arch, which I was very involved in sculpting. And he loved that puppet, and was voiced by Nick Rabinowitz, who did a fantastic job of the Arch's voice. And he loved it so much, and he had such a great sense of humor, that on a few occasions when he didn't have, when he wasn't able to do a gig for his AIDS foundation, he actually asked the puppet to stand in for him. Isn't that amazing? And the last two are Nelson Mandela again. And this is one that I've shown to young people, and not only young people, but everywhere. This is one that I did when Nelson Mandela turned 80. And I thought, imagine being Nelson Mandela when he was very young. I did Nelson Mandela the early years. And the teacher says to the principal, so you see, it's in Kunu, What Will I Be is the project. This one can't make up his mind. He put down lawyer, activist, freedom fighter, prisoner of conscience, president, reconciler, nation builder, visionary, and 20th century icon, which of course Nelson Mandela couldn't imagine. But there's a sort of a little in-joke with the reader where you're seeing, well, you just imagine any young boy or girl sitting inside a classroom and thinking, I do want to make a difference. I mean, he couldn't know he was going to become all those things, but that is what that drawing is trying to think about and talk about. And the last thing I'll show you is also Nelson Mandela. He also got a chance. I got a chance to actually be with him and with the puppet that we made of him. The first one we did in 1998, when he stepped down as president. There was an event in Parliament. I was invited, which doesn't happen a lot these days. So I went along to Parliament, and then afterwards there was a sort of garden party, and I had this puppet in the boot of my old beaten-up car, and I got the puppet out and I sort of smuggled it in, and then had to put it through the metal detectors, which some people thought was a bit in for a dig. And then I got the puppet out, and I was walking around with the puppet. Hello, how are you? I haven't seen you for a long time. Where did you say? And then and the parliamentarians were swarming around. They wanted pictures with the puppet. Now I got permission to go to Madiba at the end of the function. And he hadn't seen this. This was earlier. So I walked up to him with the puppet in my hand, in front of me, and he took one look. He said, "Oh, I believe I have met this gentleman before." And that was somebody who was not defensive, somebody who understood humor, he understood satire. I received a phone call from him in that same year, earlier in that year. And I was not expecting it, and that's a long story which I don't have time to tell you, but when I finally realized that it wasn't one of my friends playing a joke on me, and he said, I am very upset with you. And I said, I'm sorry, what have I done? He had just seen that my cartoons would no longer be in the Cape Argus because I'd be moving to another paper, and he loved seeing them when he was in Parliament. And in those days, there's no online. So he just wanted to phone me himself and tell me that. And I said, I'm flabbergasted that you actually, so this is the short version of the story, that you actually phoned me yourself. But even more, I just want to say one thing. In the 4 years since I met you, I'm amazed that you phoned me, because you would have seen the cartoons getting more and more critical of the ANC and of government. And he said, oh, but that is your job. Which was the most important thing anyone's ever said to me about what I do. And it was fantastic to hear that. And I just hope for all of your sakes you find that thing that you want to do that will make a difference, or that you think is making a difference, and get involved in that. And thank you very much. It's a great honor to be here.
To our pupils, to our staff, to our councillors, and to our invited guests and guests of honour, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. It's been very special to host you. A very special word of thanks must also go to the Neil Aggett family, who have joined us online today. Thank you so much for joining us, and obviously our thoughts and our prayers remain with you as a family. Then, it obviously worked very well and made an impact earlier on. So, Dr. Shapiro, thank you so much for spending your time and your thoughts with us this afternoon, especially at this auspicious occasion. It's really been a privilege for us to host you. I so enjoyed chatting to you this afternoon over lunch. I thoroughly enjoyed your presentation this afternoon, and we look forward again to hosting you this evening. Thank you so much for teaching us that humor is so much a part of our lives and so needed in our lives. Thank you for being a champion of freedom of speech. Thank you too for encouraging us to stand up against injustice and teaching us all that we do have a voice, in whatever way that is. I'd like to now call on Luke and Catherine, our heads of school, just to pass on a small token of our appreciation to you. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Before we close our time together, I would invite you to stand for a brief moment of quiet, and then I'll pray. Would you stand? Let us pray. Loving God, as we gather in the chapel this afternoon, there are many issues facing our world. We are watching horrific scenes from Ukraine, with ordinary people having to deal with their lives being disrupted in ways we don't fully understand. There is violence, demonstration, and divisions in many other countries as well, like Ethiopia, Yemen, and Nigeria. We continue to see big gaps between the rich and the poor, inequality in education and healthcare, and all of this exacerbated by the pandemic. We continue to fight racism and violence against women and children. We're tired of hearing about misappropriation of state funds meant for the poor. Thank you for the memory of Neil Aggett, for his memory challenges and inspires us, for he was a Kingswoodian. He played on these fields, studied in our classrooms, and sat in this very chapel. And while some of the issues he faced were different, his heart was gripped by the injustices of his day. So help us to notice the injustices of our day, starting right here at school Thank you